Hello and welcome to our second episode of Pride in London Live in our 2018 season. Now today we're going to be discussing gender and sexual identity within the LGBTQ plus community. My name is Sade and I'm going to be your host and moderator for the evening. Now we want you to definitely be involved in our conversation, so please do comment, ask us questions, be a part of it, use the hashtag Pride in London Live. Now what is the show without our wonderful panels? So I'm going to get straight into it and introduce our very first person to my left. I always have to do that because I never know my left and right. Dr. Helen Webbley, welcome to the show, transgender specialist and GenderGP.
Thank you very much.
Very good to have you. And then we have Romario, Wanliss, Dr. Black Bronson, creative director and storyteller.
Thank you for having me.
Juno, Dawson, author and columnist.
Hello.
Welcome. And Amrou, looking as glam as ever, writer, performer and filmmaker.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to the show. So good to have you all this evening. Now, what are the challenges that transgender, non-binary and genderqueer folk face today? I mean, have you experienced support and or prejudice within the LGBTQ plus community? Juno, I'm going to throw this at you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so ready for that question.
Yes.
I mean, it's such a big question because you could answer that on so many different levels. I think being trans, part of being trans and non-binary is you take on board a lot of different hardships. There's issues accessing medical help. There are issues around prejudice and discrimination. There are issues with intolerance in the media. There are issues around ignorance and people believing what they read in the newspapers, and it's tough. But at the same time, on a personal level, you are yourself, and so you're happier and lighter and more content than you've ever been. But at the same time, unfortunately, part of the trans package is it does come with a whole heap of problems, unfortunately.
Of course it does. Now, have you found that, because I mean, we also have a lot of discrimination within the LGBTQ plus community, which is a major thing, do you know what I mean? Like, as much as we want cis-normative people to sit back and accept us and love us and want us, we also have people within the LGBTQ plus community who come with a lot of
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? I mean, like, Amrou, you seem ready. You want to come at me with your answer.
I have a lot to say on this topic.
Let's go.
I mean, I have to admit, it took me a really long time to put a photo of myself in drag on Tinder because of how scared I was of especially cis-normative people within the gay community.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of Grindr, if I were to go on Grindr or on Tinder, like, I might get a catch, but it's usually like just a sort of, you know, barrage of like insults. So, oh no femmes, and especially also being Muslim, you know. I think it was like, I read it was a third of married gay men in Paris voted for Marine Le Pen because it was sort of pitched that Islam was a kind of threat to civil liberty, right? Wow. So I think there are a lot of white cis normative gay men who have a lot of privilege in the community and are kind of, they reject, I think, any signifier of kind of queerness or otherness because they no longer want to associate with it. So I've definitely found dating to be, I mean, like even years ago, drag kind of was like a second closet. Like a guy would come around, and I just like hide my drag, and now I just don't have the energy for it. But I definitely have experienced, you know, if you even look at LGBT representation, it's like dominated by white gay men. If you like, everyone was talking. Yes. I read this piece which was like, oh, what a great year for queer cinema. Call Me By Your Name and God's Own Country. And I was like, that's fine. I mean, cinema. With parents who were unbelievably woke and it was in a villa in Italy, and you know, I just was like...
That film made me want to go to Italy more than anything else. That film made Italy look really beautiful.
It did make me feel impressed with the woke family though. I was like, oh, can more families be as woke as these guys? Because that's amazing.
I was just mourned my own childhood watching that film.
I never got an inspirational speech of my parents. What?
I know.
Wow, where's my inspirational
speech?
Yeah,
exactly. I was just like, is this how most parents are these days? Are people woke like this? Like, this is amazing because where they been?
Yeah.
Where they hiding?
Love Simon has woke parents as well.
There we go.
Oh my gosh, it's all about the woke parents.
I just think you have to be white and have a villa and then you're fine.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
I don't know if it's really that way. So you're saying, sorry, I just have to go back to how you're saying at the moment now you don't hide your drag closet. Is it because you are getting support within the community, or is it because you now are, you don't care, you're comfortable in your skin?
I I mean, I do get support in the community in terms of, allies and friends who just sort of support my work online and come to my shows and that kind of thing. But it's more the energy of having to, I mean, drag and presenting as queer and, being non-binary, there's so much pride with it. So just attempting to kind of hide it at all just felt really antithetical to the reason I was doing it. And if someone's not able to kind of accept me for my gender identity or expression, then I'm not really interested anymore. But that's, I think, takes maturity. I mean, I have to say, in my early 20s, I was like, I just want a Prince Charming who is a cis white guy to basically and that was just like a kind of self-loathing fantasy, I think, of thinking, if that kind of guy likes me, then I'll be fine. Now, honestly, I've been on dates with those guys and I'm actually like half asleep halfway through, and it's just, So, I mean, I just can't really be bothered.
Well, that's because you've just come into yourself and you're completely comfortable with who you are.
Yeah, I just entertain myself these days. It's great.
There we go. Who needs to go on a date? So what we're looking at the moment is apparently more than 50% of millennials are, they're coming to kind of thinking that gender's, it's falling into a spectrum. And they're much more comfortable now with experimenting or calling themselves non-binary, genderqueer. Which I think is pretty great because, it means that the youth are kind of woke, really, with regards to, gender, non-binary and genderqueer kind of identification. Do you feel like it's always been like, have you noticed the difference?
I think for me, now obviously I write teen fiction, so I spend an awful lot of time in high schools talking to young people, and it has definitely changed. I've just got back from the Hay Festival, which is in a very small rural Welsh village, and I had a big long signing queue, and in that big long signing queue there were like 6 trans or non-binary youth. That wouldn't have happened, I don't think, when I started my career in 2012, and so it's great to see that coming through. And I think the hope, I guess, and I've always said this, and I think this applies to sexual identity as well, is I think it's far healthier that young people should spend some time thinking about it. I think it's far less healthy to try not even let it into your head. I think it's a perfectly natural part of growing up and getting older to ask yourself, who am I and what is my identity? Who do I fancy? Do I fancy anyone? Not only who do I fancy, but also how do I feel about my gender? How do I want to express my gender? Is it through my clothes? Is it through my hair? Is it through piercings, tattoos? These are all, I think, really healthy, natural questions that young people should be asking.
Okay.
And
Good
answer. Just to add on, I feel like there's this big thing at the moment going, it's really now, look what the youth are doing now, but I feel like it's actually always been present in society.
Yes.
The options. I mean, I didn't know about a they pronoun, which is what I use, until about 4 years ago. And as soon as I realized that it existed, it was like having a lavender bath.
Yeah,
I was like,
but
that's
that
what it is.
makes so much sense to me right now.
Yeah, but I mean, I grew up in the Middle East and I just didn't really know about that. So it's more, it's less the kind of, I hate the sort of implication that it's a new fad.
That it's new or trendy.
Yeah, it's just there's more information and there is.
I think we have the media to thank for that a little bit. I think though, a part of the media buying into it is also a business element.
Of course, yeah.
Like if you don't show yourself to be progressive and want to be accepted, you're going to lose business, and I think a lot of people are clocking onto that now. Like for example, you see the pride colours almost everywhere now. It's the first year ever I've seen it every single where, and I understand that part of that is due to awareness, acceptance, but I think another part of it is that the pink dollar is getting stronger and we need to start waking up. So there's a strategy to it, but one that definitely I welcome.
That is a very interesting conversation that we would have a little bit later on, because it makes me go, are people jumping on to the LGBTQ plus bandwagon because we can make money from it, or are you really allies? Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to come back to that one because that's a whole other show. Dr. Webberley, I want to find out, what advice would you give to young people who are coming into themselves with regards to their sexual identity, as well as what would you say to their parents?
I love the whole spectrum of what is available to our youth today. So you can experiment with clothes, you can experiment with your friends, you can experiment with your sexuality, with your gender, you can experiment with your feelings. And I remember when I was very young growing up, you know, you had those political type kids who were really political. They were the ones that were experimenting and expressing their ideas in that way. These days we have so much more than that. You know, we've got those very political kids, and now we've got the kids who are not too scared to say, do you know what, I don't feel like I am a boy like you would imagine a boy might be. I don't feel like that. I feel more like this. And I don't want to grow up and marry a girl, Daddy. I think I might grow up and be with a boy. And I just think that the youth of today have so much opportunity. And actually within their peer groups, when you've got the peer group who aren't having external influences, who are saying, don't allow that kind of behaviour. Children are fantastic. You know, when people say to me, what do your kids think of what you do? I'm like, they love it. It's just so, they embrace it, they love it, they welcome it. It's amazing. Yeah. I think actually it's when you get older, out of school, that the real prejudice and discrimination starts creeping in.
Oh, completely. Because I mean, if you think about it, really, kids, it's innocence at the end of the day, and it's just you're really being true to yourselves more than anything else until an adult says no. You know,
I did a drag show for kids accidentally once, it was supposed to be our adult show, and they moved it really much earlier. It was at a festival, so we had about 200 kids there, between 5 to 10, and we were backstage. I was like, God, this is going to be so transgressive. What if they all freak out? Like, what are we going to do? Honestly, the kids believe that Nemo is a talking fish. You just put a fish, make it talk.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
They were just like, yeah, fine, whatever, just tell us a story. And they really didn't question it. And it was just very funny for us to see the adults sort of ducking behind the hay, like just going, oh God, what did they say? The kids just weren't blinking an eye. And I definitely think kids' behavior is quite non-binary. Yeah. And I mean, they imagine friends. Those friends are usually agender or don't have genders. True. And suddenly, it's just like, I don't even know why people need to know what like the gender is when they check the scan. Like, why do we start doing that so early on, you know? And just, so I just feel like it's an imposition, definitely.
And I think often for trans youth, and especially trans youth who are in school, a lot of the problems they experience are imposed on them by adults. So bathroom policies, uniform policies, PE policies. Actually, don't get me wrong, high school kids can be fairly vile to each other, regardless of whether they're trans or not. But actually, it seems that a lot of the problems are coming down from an organisational level.
That's really good.
Exactly.
I speak to a lot of parents, and you know, I'll say, "How is school for your child? You know, how are they doing?" And they're like, "They're doing really well. They let my child use the disabled toilet." I'm like, what do you mean? Why the disabled toilet? Why not? You know, why have we got that gender toilet thing anyway? But why not the boys' toilet? But this perception that the school is doing well if they allow the child to use the disabled toilet when actually they're trans.
You know, the bar is so low. I think that's the problem. The bar is set so low because I think as a trans woman, you know, you're just so delighted that you're not being chased through the streets with burning torches, that you are delighted to be given a disabled toilet, and that's the depressing truth of the situation, I think.
Well, I mean, the truth is, the more conversations we have like this, which are so important and so needed, the more that we're hoping that people will become woke to the whole thing, and it won't just be a disabled toilet for trans people, and more a non-binary situation, which we are seeing more, happening more and more in New York and other places. It's starting to happen now that people are having LGBT parties. You'll see that when you go into the bathrooms.
Have you ever been on an aeroplane?
Yeah.
If you've been on an aeroplane, you have used a gender-neutral bathroom. And I love this idea that gender-neutral toilets are like this crazy concept that Ally McBeal invented. No, if you've been on an aeroplane, you are familiar with the non-binary toilet.
You've been doing it for the last...
You pooed on that toilet if you've been on a long-haul flight.
It's so true.
And also people, really against the they pronoun, like it really messes up my grammar. And then I'd be like, okay, let me tell you about a friend of mine. And then they say, oh, what's their name? I'd be like, I didn't tell you the gender, and you've been using the they pronoun.
There we go, yeah.
You use it all the time.
Yeah.
And suddenly people are like, well, I can't do that because it's just going to really mess up the way that I think and talk, and it's just an impossible imposition. I'm like, well, you literally have just done it. And
the problem with people is they're too headstrong about unlearning what they've learned. And that's what it's about. I'm constantly learning. So I need to unlearn the things that I've always been taught. He, she, blue, pink. Do you know what I mean?
I think it goes a bit deeper than that. It's about uprooting your own sense of identity.
Of course.
For example, without my manhood, if I was to strip that away, without my blackness, without my history, that I've grown up to know and hold on to so much. If you now come and tell me this is not right, or this is hurting people, this sense of belief, I have to dig into myself and let that go, and that's often a very painful experience.
Of course.
And
You're right.
yeah, so I empathize a little bit. Is it right? No, but I do empathize a little bit. There's a lot going on there that I think we're not addressing as well. And also my experience of navigating the world, you know, from a trans masculine perspective. It's often invisible, which is a slight privilege, you know. But often when I talk to people, I don't really come across a lot of hate. And I wonder if a lot of these organizations who are putting in the policies, for example, a child comes out and they're trans, what toilet should we use? Are they actually asking the consents of, like, are they asking the audience? Are they asking the other kids? Are they asking the parents? And oftentimes I think it's just their own thought process. They're going, holy crap, we're about to lose so much funding, again business, we lose so much funding, we have to we can't do that. There's no way. And I think maybe if they did put it out as a general question, are you okay with this? You might get 3, 4, 5 people. I think there's a megaphone for people who hate, and there's not enough of a loud megaphone for the people who are actually championing our cause and for us to live.
Completely agree with you. Completely agree.
And that's a media thing. I think
It
the media
is.
would love the general public to believe there is some great divide or some great conflict. And particularly, I'm sure we will talk about this notion that there is some sort of bitter rivalry between feminists and transgender, particularly transgender women. And I'm like, well, no, there isn't. You're trying to create a narrative where there really isn't one. Because all of my friends, all of my allies are largely women, and they're all feminists. I'm a feminist. All the trans people I know are feminists. The divide isn't there. It suits the tabloids and it suits Channel 4 for there to be a problem where there really isn't one.
I mean, that was really
It's
interesting.
minute.
Yeah, but also that's interesting in terms of the way that show went about saying you're allowed on the debate, but you're just debating your right to exist. I just felt that was, I think we need more events like this where you just celebrate yourself or talk about your experience, and then people will just empathize and understand. Whereas that was very much an example of let's create this war and basically cash in on it.
Well,
and
it makes good TV. I mean, I'm not going to deny it makes great TV, and I'm an author, so you know, my job is telling stories and creating conflict. But unfortunately, this is a story that affects my life and it affects our lives. And if it's making our life harder, then I think the media should be a little more responsible with the way they're telling that story.
I think that there's so much debate we can have. There is so much that we as a society can talk about. How do we get kids better integrated? How do we get medical help better integrated? How do we, you know, the clothes in the supermarket, the clothes in the stores, how do we make that better? So there's so much debate we can have. Why are we debating whether you exist or whether we should allow you to exist? I mean, that's we don't need that. That's finished.
And
There's so much fun debate to have.
And if you set up that debate, it gives people agency to think you can refute it in the first place, and that was what I think was a really depressing thing. By just going, okay, we're going to debate your right to identify, suggests that there is validity in the opposing side, because a debate is supposed to be, you know, that was
two sides.
What I find interesting, what I think about sometimes is like, if we entertain the conversation that we should not exist or we don't exist or we shouldn't call ourselves, what's the alternative that they're presenting? Because there's their truth, which is, okay, you think it's wrong. There's reality. We are experiencing prejudice and ignorance. Would you rather we take our own lives? Is that what you want to, like? What's your alternative? Like, I don't get it, and that's why I don't like debating it, because you might want to debate it, but I'm
Still here.
you can touch me like
it's not going to go
here.
anywhere.
Real.
Yeah.
yeah. That's really
So
Well, what's the alternative?
I mean, if we move aside from the debating, because we all agree that the debating part is just absolutely rubbish and we should not be doing it at all, do you think, just going back to the young people, that we have enough role models that are transgender, non-binary, genderqueer, so that the young people have more people to look up to? Do we have enough?
The thing about role models is that that question's a bit weird for me. It's almost triggering as well, because what we're really asking, we're asking who's willing to give up their privacy and go on a platform, represent a certain community. Now, when that role model goes on top, you're not just looking at that person championing a specific cause,
Yeah.
you're also digging into their personal lives.
Okay.
I think it's quite triggering. I'm not sure how I feel about that one.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had patients, I call them, when they come to see me, they're patients. We have had patients from every single walk of life, and I think that is what's helpful. So we have had patients who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are accountants. We've had patients who work in supermarkets, who are teachers, people who are unemployed, who are employed, people who are black or white or Muslim, whatever. So actually it's about normality, and perhaps sometimes the very visible role model type person puts it up on a pedestal, but what we need is to bring this into everyday normality, into schools, into the supermarket, into the workplace, into the park, into the swimming pools.
Agreed.
And also,
Agreed.
I feel the role models, I really very much think we need more role models and visibility, but I think we almost celebrate the ones who have won the normative fantasy a little bit. So sort of like, if you think about gay role models, like I am not inspired by Tom Daley and Dustin Lance getting together and basically...
They're quite fit.
I mean, yeah, they are quite fit, but but
You
like
can't see yourself, and
and that's and it's like
diversity in role models
they've
is what
done
we
it.
need.
Look, you can do it too, and that's not and in terms of non-binariness, even the way I think when we're looking at genderqueer role models, I'm speaking to a lot of trans women who say to me that it tends to be the trans women who pass the most that get celebrated, rather than maybe some
And
more.
my transition was documented in Glamour magazine. I had a monthly column, and that was a choice. Nobody, it wasn't like mandatory. It wasn't national service. But I felt because I was already, I had 6 books out under my old name, so I already had a profile. So I decided to try and use it. And I get lots of emails, especially from young sort of trans kids. But it's not always easy.
Yeah.
It can be hard. I get a lot of stuff thrown at me online. There are forums about me on Mumsnet, and it's horrible. A lot of people discussing my body and saying that I'm a bad role model and saying that I'm a terrible example and that I'm a fraud. But I do think I'd do it all again. I think, for those kids who've emailed to say that I've in some way helped. And of course, I owe a great debt to my role models, Paris Lees and Andrea Pedgic, and trans women who had gone before me as well. So I think that the key is in just there being a lot more of us, and then it would take some of the individual pressure off so that we can share the job slightly, I think.
Of course. Sorry to cut you off.
Romario, I'll tweet about it.
You'll
later.
tweet about it. No, you'll come back and
later.
you'll tell us all about it. We're going to just take a look at some of the hot news that happened within the LGBTQ plus community. So have a look at this.
More than 20 women were removed from the male swimming ponds in Hampstead Heath during a protest over new rules at the North London Park. Everyone who identifies as female will now have access to the women's ponds. The Man Friday campaign encouraged people to self-identify as men just for a day as to access the men's pool. The group was set up to protest changes to the Gender Recognition Act, which would allow people to self-certify their gender without undergoing medical checks. Speaking to Pink News, LGBT activists say the stunt was dishonest and misrepresented trans people. There was news from the Netherlands this week as a court in Limburg ruled that those who identify as non-binary could have their sex on their birth certificate changed. According to Dutch News, people will now be able to alter their documents to say no determined sex. Parents have had this option when registering their child since 1993, but this is the first time an adult has been able to make the change retrospectively. Aussie soap Neighbours will see Australia's first on-scene same-sex wedding. According to Radio Times, Aaron Brennan, played by Matt Wilson, and David Tanaka, played by Takaya Honda, are set to tie the knot in September. LGBT activist and actress Magda Zubanski, known for her portrayal of Sharon in the sitcom Kath and Kim, will officiate the marriage. And Aberdeen's Evening Express joined celebrations as the Granite City celebrated its first ever Pride event. More than 2,000 people marched through the streets of the Scottish city, with another 5,000 attending events as part of the festivities. Even a wedding was held in Union Square in the centre of the town. Organisers hope that this will be the first of many Grampian Prides.
Welcome back to our second episode of Pride in London Live in our 2018 season. Still here with our amazing panel, and we have not stopped talking, especially about role models. Getting in there. It's been a very interesting topic. If you have only just joined us, we're talking about gender and sexual identity within the LGBTQ plus community. We would love to hear from you. Any comments or any questions that you may have for anybody in our panel, please do hashtag Pride in London Live. Now, we are seeing a lot of public awareness with regards to trans kids. It's coming up in the agenda. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's like all uppity about it. When do you think is the right age to consider your gender identity and transitioning? Like, is there an age issue?
Can I answer?
Yes, I'd love for you to answer.
I think those that say that we should stop children or that children are too young to explore their gender identity are causing a real load of harm. If we can catch children at the crucial age of before and peri-puberty, and if needs be, press pause on that puberty and just stop puberty from developing that body in a way that might, in the future, really cause an impact on that person, then we're doing a really good job. Yeah. So people who are saying, children are too young, have they ever met a trans child? Yeah. Have they ever talked to a child? Have they ever seen how excruciating it is for that child to be progressing through a puberty which is so wrong for them? Yeah. So when is too young? Never. I have parents tell me that they knew from when the child was literally a baby that there was just some difference there, that the gender, and it turned out to be gender. They didn't know what it was, but they know from such an early age. Why not let children express themselves and practice and play and develop and learn and experiment? What harm can it possibly do?
Oh, couldn't agree with you more. Honestly, could not agree with you more. I mean, I knew from a very young age that I liked girls, and you're just not allowed to think that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just.
I mean, I was 3 when I first started asking my mum when I would become a girl, and obviously this was the late 80s. We didn't have the education. My mum wasn't aware. My dad didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. But if somebody like Helen had spoken to me when I was a child, it would have made a world of difference, and I wouldn't have had these shoulders. Things, and I've spent,
be proud of your shoulders.
As has been documented through my column. I've had work done. I've had cosmetic surgery, and I might not have needed that had I been treated as an adolescent. So I've had to spend a lot of time and pain getting my body and face into the way that it should have always been.
But you know what? I didn't learn this in medical school. I didn't learn this from books. I learned this from talking to so many trans people, so many parents of trans people. And so that it doesn't take being a doctor to learn about that. What it takes is accepting that this variation in humanity exists, listening, talking, learning, reading stories, reading books, looking at vlogs and blogs and videos, and learn and understand it. And once you understand it, it's just so amazing.
I second what Helen says, because the first part you said, because I one of my motto in life is share a story, save a life. That motto was born out of a suicidal moment I had around 2011, because the GIC said I could have my testosterone. I went to the GP, who then refused to give it to me, which I think was on the basis of prejudice, because there was some religion thing going on there. And I went through this meltdown, panic mode, suicidal moment. I went to a charity. The minute I told them I was really desperate, they were, we ain't got nothing to do with this, we can't help you. And I was in that moment, and the thing that saved me was actually social media, weird enough, right? And it's, crap, a mind thing there. But one of the key things for me is that the reason I do what I'm doing isn't because I want to be this positive role model. It's because I feel like I've already died inside, because I've lost so much of my first half of my life. I mourn it. And I mourn it so much, and I feel like there's nothing I can get from it. And especially when my relationship broke down, so now there's no one to love as well. And so now I wasn't going to take my life. I realized that. So now I needed something to love and feel for. So I'm a huge advocate in allowing young people to transition as early as possible, so that they don't spend their 30s and 40s mourning their teens and their, it's heartbreaking, and that's where I come from that place. So.
And also mental health is like, I feel anxiety. I mean, I have a lot of mental health problems, have to, have great care with it. But if you're a kid and you have to internalize something, or you're just not allowed to express something, that a constant childhood. I mean, as someone who grew up very Muslim, I was about 18, even though I knew I was if you're not even allowed to ask those questions, that is what causes really, really bad mental health, anxiety, OCD, paranoia, because you're just dealing with it alone. And that's why, LGBT mental health figures are so problematic at the moment, and I think it comes from childhood. You learn all these thought patterns, and they actually become ingrained into your biology. And if I had an awareness of just the terminology, that would have just been so helpful.
Well, we know. Because something that never gets talked about is the actual statistics. And actually, we know that nearly half of young trans people have tried to kill themselves. Yeah. That's data from Stonewall. Not just thought about it, they've tried to kill themselves. And we also know from a recent study in Canada that actually, if young trans and non-binary children are taken seriously, would you Adam and Eve it, they have better mental health outcomes. I mean, can you imagine that listening to a young person would make them
actually
happier?
Do that?
I mean, crazy.
And they say there's no research. They say there's no stats. That's two such easy stats to do. If you don't listen to people and let people be who they are, we have mental health issues such as depression, anxiety. Let people be who they are, and all of a sudden they feel happy and integrated.
Yeah.
It's also better
so that's
for
it.
society, less anxiety.
Yeah.
It's just better for the world.
Yeah, it's better for the world. It brings the vibration up to love and light.
Yeah.
The problem with this for the medical profession is that the two have been put together. So, transgender, mental health. What they don't realise is that it's not being transgender that makes mental health. It's because that identity is not being allowed to express itself, not being heard, not being listened to, not believed, which causes so much mental health issues. And the medical profession, lesson number 1, just understand that. That's really important.
So exactly what we're talking about now, the self-identification is becoming, it's controversial at the moment in the legislation, do you know what I mean? So is it a case of allowing people to just identify self already with regards to their gender and not have to even think about the medical procedures just yet?
I think so. I mean, the other day I went to log on to Wi-Fi at this cafe, and it said I couldn't log on without saying if I was a man or a woman, and I'm non-binary. I was like, why can I not access this Wi-Fi without why can't I just? I really just wanted to put neither. Yeah. I just didn't, and there wasn't an option. And then I was like, well, now I feel anxious, and it's all just to use Wi-Fi, and the coffee is really bad.
And that's it.
It's a succession of blows.
I tried to be an adult the other day and apply for a real job, and the application process online was just absolutely phenomenal, because the drop-down menu, when it came to what you identify with, was all there. It was male, female, non-binary, they. It was all there, and I was just having so much fun applying for this job. I was just like, yes, the site is woke. It's woke. You're woke. Do you get It was just amazing to see that, and I was like, we need this everywhere. We need this everywhere.
I mean, there's great controversy around this notion of self-identity. I think it's more about self-declaration and making a statutory declaration, which is still going to be probably quite a complex legal process. This is not like the people in that VT who are like, lol, I identify as a man between the hours of 3 and 5 on a Wednesday. That's actually fraud, and legally that would be a crime if you were to try to do that. Yeah. This is removing the medical element is just one thing. To apply for a new passport, a new driver's license, for a new birth certificate would still be a huge and onerous and lengthy and time-consuming procedure, just as it was, the first thing that I did as when I came out as trans was I needed a new passport. And yeah, it was a long process, and I needed to provide all kinds of documentation, but not necessarily medical documentation. And I think that's what people don't realise as well, which is that trans and non-binary people have already been doing this for years to get passports and driving licenses. And in countries like Ireland, Argentina, Malta, Norway, where people can already self-identify their gender, we haven't seen any problems. People aren't exploiting the system. People are just using it to apply for a new birth certificate. And it will only affect trans and non-binary people and no one else.
I mean, it was
very powerful. Yeah, very, very powerful.
But it just reminded me of when Sarah Ditton said, well, really, we shouldn't allow hormones because straight men will transition into women to attack women. And I'm like, do you really think that
Well,
is...
where's the receipt?
Where's the receipt? And then she literally said,
that.
I've heard about it once in the Barbican. I'm like, it was probably some installation art piece.
Yeah,
I mean,
it probably wasn't even a real thing.
I heard about it once in the Barbican. Is that what it's come
literally,
down
that's
to?
what it's come down
Oh,
to. This
goodness.
hypothetical fear that actually it only affects trans and non-binary people. Like, it's
Yeah.
not going to...
That's weird. We've got some wonderful comments from our viewers who are watching us at the moment. We have one for you, Glamroo. Shamil
right.
says, love the diverse panel and love Glamroo's makeup.
Oh, okay.
Josh says,
That's-
as a
that's
fellow
acceptable.
GP, I'm very impressed with Helen. You're talking a lot of sense. Kate asks, are we a victim of our own success? With exponentially rising numbers of people coming out as trans or non-binary, the NHS resources are increasingly overwhelmed. Do we need to do more to improve medical care for the community? That's a really good question. Helen, do you think you can answer that one?
Well, do you know what? The NHS is stretched, whatever the condition. You know, we haven't got enough
That's
money
true.
for diabetes, for hypertension, for cancer. We haven't got enough money for any of those things. But what has happened is that the NHS have said that we do treat diabetes, we do treat blood pressure, we do treat cancer, and we do offer medical help for transgender people needing to medically or surgically transition. End of story.
Yeah.
The NHS have made that decision. So therefore, now the NHS has to find the pot that fills it. Yes, there are going to be a lot more people coming through for wanting medical and surgical help, but those people need that help. So, you know, the NHS is stretched in every single aspect of it, including transgender healthcare.
Including mental health. I mean, if you start to help with trans and really allow those people the medical care, like that might take away the stress from some of the anxiety that...
Well, exactly,
Same
true.
as-
So it
same
does
as,
work out.
The eating healthy campaign.
Yeah.
It's to take stress from diabetes and all this different stuff. So I think it's just an easy target.
What we need to do actually, at the
Yeah, that's
moment
true.
in the UK, transgender healthcare is in a tertiary, highly specialised units. That's why we've only got 7 clinics in the whole of the UK, which are really, really stretched. What we need to do is bring that out of there, back into general practice, because we don't need months and months and years of assessment to say, yes, you're transgender. You just don't need it.
No.
You know, like you said a minute ago, people, by the time they get to go to their doctor, they have done that exploration for years.
They're ready.
And it's their first day at the doctor's and they're like, today I am going to tell my doctor that I need help. And they get there and the doctor goes, no. And you're like, oh no, you know, they've done all that exploration.
I think because I was actually seen relatively quickly. I waited about 11 months for my first appointment at the gender clinic, which nationally isn't actually that bad, actually. But that first appointment was to tell my GP to prescribe me the hormones. And my GP, who is a gay man, he was fully supportive. And he said, if I could start you on this treatment, I would, but my hands are tied.
By who?
Oh, yeah.
By who? Because there are you know, apologies to all my
Helen's getting
colleagues.
upset right now. Brilliant, Helen, come on.
Apologies to my colleagues out there, but you know, let's not use excuses that aren't necessarily there. And I think people need to say, okay, you feel your hands are tied. Who is tying your hands? Because actually, no one is.
Nobody
What
is.
it does is that you've got to be brave enough to say, do you know what? You are completely and utterly trans. I've never met anyone more trans than you, and you are going to be my first patient that I give this packet of hormone pills to, because I give hormone pills to girls who want to go on the pill, to mums who are going through the menopause. So now I'm going to give the same packet of pills to you because you're trans, and you're not going to explode. You're just going to feel happier and have less mental health issues. So those hands aren't tied, and we need to be asking our doctors, who do you think is tying your hands, and are they really?
It's just
That's a good question,
My
yeah.
experience has been that they're fair, because there's a shared care as well. They're scared of giving me these hormones, then what's going to happen to me? They're responsible for that. So when I walk into my GP, I usually walk with a massive pamphlet, and I tell them everything that's happening. I'm like, yeah, sure. This is the information. Don't worry
Here
about
you
it.
are.
But that's Russian roulette, though. You don't get that from every
No,
single
you
GP.
don't. But the thing is, the list of side effects are the side effects you want. You want a hairy chin, and you want your voice
That's
to break,
true.
and you want a good bit of muscles, and it's like, well, okay, you
It's
want
everything
all the
I'm
side
asking
effects
for,
there.
please, and thank you. We have more Facebook comments that have come in. Daniel says one of the biggest problems affecting trans, non-binary and genderqueer people at the moment is every growing onslaught of transphobic fear-mongering in the media.
Yes. How lovely that that we're on the same page. It must be selling newspapers.
Oh, yeah.
If it wasn't selling newspapers, they wouldn't bother.
Yeah, clickbait as well.
But I just think
There are some great, like when I took part in the genderqueer documentary, I thought that was dealt with sensitively in terms of, from a production point of view. They handled our story. They just turned the camera on and they left us to it. And we didn't do anything. Nothing was instigated. That's what we did. I think it's really unfair as well that the community is meant to pit us all into one pot. We all should understand each other. So that's the first thing. We're all individuals.
Yeah.
In terms of the media, again, there's a business element to that, and but there are some companies leading the way in terms of
course.
This is the way it should
Yeah,
be.
yeah, yeah.
So it's not all negative. For example, this is classed as media.
Yeah.
And this is positive media,
It's
indeed.
positive media.
Tara says most trans role models' success are built before coming out or have careers in the media academia or self-employed. It would be great to celebrate trans role models across professions and focus on the barriers that limit trans people's careers still today, which is actually quite true. You agree, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, what I loved, I did earlier this year, I did a documentary for ITV called Transformation Street, and what I loved about Transformation Street was that I think over the course of the series it featured 12 of us, trans men and women living their lives. I think there was a train driver, a teacher, girl who works in IT.
Brilliant.
And that's really important
Because you're people at the end of the day.
and
do you know
historically
what I mean?
trans people have struggled in the workplace as well, because it felt there was barriers to working, especially with public-facing customer service roles. So I think it's really important that we start to see some of those barriers breaking.
That's
Indeed.
really. I've been in production company meetings where they want you picture something about drag or something, and I'll pitch them something without much conflict, and everyone just sort of goes, "Oh, that's not. We don't." They get quite confused because I think people think that the story should be right. You're queer, and then there's a war because of it, and it's like, but what about just like, they are queer or trans, and it's actually a story about, I don't know, riding a bike, and people just go, oh, it's not what I thought it would be, and I think that's what we need in terms of representation, not
agreed.
just making the story about the identity, but just like watching the complex lives, because we're all so different.
Yeah, exactly.
What's important is what you've said is that it's only a little few people holding on to that narrative who has the power and the privilege to project that out to us. That's what the.
But that's why we're looking at so many people at the moment who are, and which is amazing, young filmmakers, young storytellers, whatever it may be, performers who are just going out there and doing their own thing. Even if you're making a 5-minute microfilm that is just telling a story that so happens to have a transgender, a lesbian, and a non-binary character living their lives, not being those characters.
If the big media buys into it, because what you need to remember as well, these people making these small stuff, as much as we feel like, oh, we want to make these stories, they need to eat.
I completely
they
agree
need
with
to live. So the bigger companies,
we all trying to eat.
It's like, we want these role models, well, help sustain them. Help sustain them
agreed.
to continue to make that.
The other thing is, let's not forget, your average normal person who's sitting at home, and they are making little tiny videos of their own life and sharing them with people. And the amount of people, again, trans people who've come to me and said, I was just on YouTube and I saw this kid just the same as me, and they were telling this story, and I'm like, that's me, that was me, and then I knew what it was. And that kid wasn't some, famous whatever. They were just a normal child who had the same kind of story that this person, and they were looking at it.
What's interesting though, not to cut you there, but even the YouTube, big media, they do censor some of the trans narratives when you go on their smell. They do block your videos sometimes when you say certain
you're spot on. My lesbian videos have been blocked.
So there's it's
I'm just saying.
silence.
I've just put it in there.
I know, we were all just like, oh God,
my video got blocked. Like, drop mic.
That was it. Oh, it was so wonderful having all of you with us today, talking about this specific and so important topic. Thank you all for watching. Unfortunately, it has come to an end. I wish we could carry on all night.
Thank you for having us.
But we have indeed run out of time. So thank you everyone at home for watching, and we will definitely see you next time.
Adios.
Thank you.